Hello and welcome back to the channel. My name is Dan and I'm here to bring you another FPL video. In this one we've done something a little bit different as suggested by someone in the FPL Link community. Shout out to you, Chat Stop Football, because you've suggested this content and I've had a pretty good reception, to be fair. So I've got 3 teams today that I'll be reviewing for Game Week 22 all the way through as well to Game Week 25 in terms of future planning. So it's something I've not done before, but it's taken a lot of effort really to put this content together. So I hope you appreciate it. Of course, this is very, very unique and specific to each of these teams, but some of the content I feel like may be useful still for you as a manager, just to suggest certain transfers, certain options. So do stick around even if these teams aren't your own. Of course, if you do like the content, guys, then smash that like below for me. But without further ado, let's jump into the first of the 3 successful managers for the review. Of course, I've got SportCat01 as the first YouTube user here. He's been part of the community for quite some time now, so congratulations to you, sir, to have the team reviewed. And here we are. I've given you 4 stars out of 5 simply because I feel like you're pretty much set up in a very, very good position where I don't feel like too many hits are needed to navigate these next few weeks, and potentially just overall you've put yourself in a what I would say a very, very good position to climb those ranks. There's 2 kind of pain points I can point out as best here for you as possible, which is Mitrovic and Cancelo. I think they're the 2 players that potentially I don't like in your team. That's just because I think Cancelo, of course, we know with the reduced minutes of recent falling out of favour with Pep, I would potentially look at moving him on. My only difficulty for you over this kind of future planning period, I couldn't find an optimal time essentially to get rid of him. So I've just benched him on this occasion. If you feel like you want to put him, let's say, ahead of Mitrovic, then absolutely I would also say that's a possible play. But the transfer that I'll be recommending as well is where the vice-captaincy chip is in De Bruyne. So we'll go through that in more detail shortly. Rashford captaincy, I think, is a no-brainer. Now that we know United are definitely getting that double game week against Leeds, thanks to the FA Cup results not being draws in either Leeds' fixture or United's fixtures yesterday. So that leads us really into where I feel like you should use at least 1 transfer and a possible -4. And this goes to De Bruyne and to Fernandes. I think, having a second Manchester United attacker in the double game week makes a lot of sense. Of course, the vice-captaincy would also be on Bruno if you made that move as well, which I think is warranted, again, being a double game week player. And then I'll be looking at potentially moving Mitrovic on to Ivan Toney. Now, there's a couple of reasons for this, really. I think Mitrovic against Chelsea will struggle a little bit. I think Chelsea are a team on the up, and I do genuinely believe that their defensive unit is starting to take shape now. They weren't conceding a major amount of goals in many games anyway, and I don't feel like Mitrovic is in form at the moment. He's, of course, missed 3 penalties, scored 3 penalties, so he's got a 50% return ratio on those. And I feel like at his price point, with just that extra little bit of money that you need to get to Ivan Toney, I think that can be warranted. I mean, you've got 4.1 million in the bank to play around with, just thanks to so many budget enablers and options that we've got in our teams at the moment. Of course, De Bruyne down to Fernandes frees up even more money for you. So Mitrovic to Toney is a quite simple move for you. It just depends, like I said, on whether you want to take the risk with potentially playing Cancelo ahead of Mitrovic and then not taking the -4. But I think Toney against Southampton, that's brace territory for him, right? So it doesn't only warrant the -4 for Ivan Toney being able to come in for Mitrovic, it also warrants the -4 based on Cancelo maybe not even featuring against Spurs, who would be your bench option, right? So I feel like this is the possible route that I would go down for you in Game Week 22, and then that reaches the next stage of this video for you, which is the future plans for Game Week 23 to 25. So I've used planfpl.com. I will leave a link in the description of the video to this website. I've recommended it several times on this channel, but if you are new around here and you want to understand how to future plan for FPL, the official website, in my opinion, doesn't give us the tools, or it just isn't there, right? That the official website doesn't give us the capability of seeing what our teams look like in the future once we confirm or look at certain transfers. But Plan FPL does that, all based on your team ID from FPL. It takes your live budget, it takes your live team into account, and essentially you can just tinker bench options, captaincy, and so on to get us to this stage of the video. So This is how game week 23 would look if you did Fernandes to De Bruyne. So yes, it is the reversal of what we've just done in game week 22, but I just feel like it's a huge upside in getting the doubler twice, essentially within a couple of game weeks. Yes, we're using the transfers, but we know that City have got a guaranteed fixture in 25 as they're no longer part of the EFL Cup. That just means for me that De Bruyne is going to be a long-term hold beyond this move anyway. So catching 2 doublers over these few double game weeks, I think makes the most sense. And as you can see on screen, I haven't of course done the full custom graphics for your squad, but the screenshot from Plan FPL shows you where you would be. So you would have Cancelo double as an option for you. That's why holding him I think is pretty important, or as an option for you in the short term. You could play Ivan Toney against Arsenal for any one of those defenders. I mean, it's tricky because Ben White's doubling, Cancelo's doubling. Luke Shaw against Leeds, I think, is a positive fixture. And we know that Trippier against Bournemouth, and with the amount of bonus points this guy racks up, I just feel like Toney against Arsenal maybe not the best move. Let's say if Matoma doesn't look like he's hit that lovely purple patch that we're kind of expecting for him against Bournemouth specifically in game week 22, maybe you bench him. I don't know, but you have the option really of Ivan Toney coming in as well for you. So that's 23. I think your squad looks fantastic on this game week, and then we move into game week 24, and this is where I feel like it could be really, really pivotal. You could play Bueno, Trippier ahead of Cancelo. Again here, I've just picked Cancelo because against Forest away, I feel like that is a no-brainer, to be honest, if he does start getting back into favour with Pep Guardiola. But rolling the transfer in 24 is going to be the most important thing, I think, for all managers across the board. Not just you specifically, or the 3 managers that I'm reviewing today. I feel like rolling the transfer, going into blank game week 25 will give us the optimal amount of moves, really. It gives us the most flexibility. It gives us the 2 free transfers with the possibility of a -4 to essentially still be able to bench some of our Manchester United and Newcastle assets and still come out unscathed, essentially, which I feel like is the right move. I can't help but feel like rolling in 24 is going to be almost guaranteed for a lot of managers at this point. It's only really injury or suspension that may change that. But again, this Trippier and Bueno double up in terms of the bench here as options for you, I feel like is enough cover for you, even if there was some kind of injury or some kind of concern for you. You've got Trippier against Liverpool at home. Okay, not a great fixture, but again, he's a bonus point machine. And then Bueno against Bournemouth at home. It's the best fixture, I think, that you can ask for in the league at the moment. So maybe you play him ahead of Cancelo. So you've got options, and I think rolling the transfer here makes the most sense. And then finally, that brings us into game week 25 for you. And game week 25, as I've mentioned, is going to be a bit of a tricky one to navigate. Now, I've recommended that Toney comes out here for João Felix. Now, that might come as a bit of a surprise because I've recommended bringing him in game week 22, and then also only featured him in game week 23 and 22 and 24 for you, and benching him in 23. But I think if Brentford, it is looking likely, of course, that Manchester United will reach the EFL final. So if we reach the EFL Cup final, that does mean our game against Brentford will be a blank, and that means Ivan Toney will not be playing against Manchester United in game week 25. So I don't see the reason to hold on to him, and I'm looking at potentially João Felix as an option as that budget striker. Now, Chelsea's fixtures in 25, same for Aston Villa's, which is why I'm recommending maybe going Greenwood to Watkins here for you. It's really quite a large fixture swing. Chelsea and Villa, respectively, are very high up on the fixture ticker for 25 onwards. I think Villa actually make the top from both a defensive and an attacking point of view. And really then that puts your squad in a position where you've only got Matoma as a possible question mark. So, of course, during recording this afternoon, we are still waiting to see the result of Liverpool versus Brighton in the FA Cup. That will determine where we feel a potential blank for Brighton. And that's because they essentially are playing Newcastle in 25, but we also know that Newcastle are probably favourites to reach the EFL Cup final alongside Manchester United. So what you could hope for is you could hope that Southampton on the reverse fixture beat Newcastle by, let's say, 2 goals, and they win the 2 legs 2-1 on aggregate. That would then mean that this fixture would definitely go ahead. The other option is that Brighton lose today against Liverpool, and that means that there is a potential rescheduled fixture in the midweek where Brighton can still play, even if they, of course, Newcastle do get to the EFL final. So hopefully that makes sense. But Ben Crellin's spreadsheet is definitely where I would look at. But again, that only gives you one player on this starting 11 that potentially could blank in Matoma. So I feel like that's fantastic. You then carry forward Trippier, Luke Shaw and Rashford moving forward into the future fixtures, and you've not taken a hit yet with this recommendation. If you wanted to move Matoma on at that point, I don't mind that move essentially for a -4 to make sure you can field 11 players, but I feel like this is where I would recommend you getting to for 25 based on our current knowledge. So hopefully that helps. 25 is probably going to be the most tricky in terms of future planning for, because we don't know all the results yet or all the fixtures, but hopefully this gives you an idea of where I'd kind of head towards if I was in your position. Then moving into the second team. So we have next up a manager called Arte. So yeah, congratulations to you for getting into the review stage. You've got a bit of a mix really in terms of players here. There's certain players and individuals here that haven't really hit form of recent, and that's why really I've kind of only given you 3 stars out of 5, is because I feel like there's quite a few pain points for you. Not only to mention, Patterson being injured, you've got Mo Salah as essentially a really high-priced asset that isn't hitting form at the moment. You've actually got a 3-5-2 formation, but Andreas is being played, I would imagine, most weeks, because Greenwood as the alternative, he's not really what I would consider a playing striker. So you can't really adjust your squad into a 3-4-3. You're pretty much stuck into a 3-5-2 on the most cases. I imagine Bueno may come in from time to time for Andreas, but I feel like with 2.6 million in the bank, this 3-5-2 formation can definitely be improved. As with the last team, I have got the captain armband on Rashford at the moment. Vice captaincy is simply just on Haaland, just because, again, he's a machine. And I'm not actually recommending that you remove Salah for a doubler on this game week. I feel like keeping Mo Salah against Wolves is going to be recommended just simply because of their league position. I do feel like Wolves are a team that we can target, and I don't see the need to move him on to, say, someone like Bruno Fernandes, even though he's a doubler, because this fixture is, I think, almost the best it gets for Mo Salah, and I think you can hold fire with him one more week until you get into game week 23, which we'll cover shortly. So this is how I think your team should line up, and I think then when you move into the possible transfers for you, I would look at using that 2.6 million and actually upgrading Andreas Pereira to Martin Odegaard. That gives you essentially this Everton away fixture. Yes, we know that they've just appointed Sean Dyche, so they're not managerless anymore, but I don't feel like within the next, say, week, they are going to be able to put together essentially a strategy or something in place to stop the top of the league, current top of the league players, right? Or team, shall I say. Odegaard is a man in form. He's a man of the moment for Arsenal, in my opinion. He's pulling all the strings in terms of those attacking outputs. And not only does it give you a great option in 22, but it actually gives you a doubler in 23 as well. So I definitely feel like this is the move that you make. I don't think I recommend any hits for you this week. I think that is the most optimal play for you, to be honest. Moving into 23 then to 25. This is how game week 23 would look if you move Mo Salah to De Bruyne. So you would then end up with 1, 2, 3. You would have 4 double game week players with De Bruyne, Haaland, Martinelli and Odegaard in your team, which I think is more than enough. Some individuals may have more than you on this occasion. They may have 5 to 6, but ultimately I still think this is great for you long term, as we know Arsenal and City have both got fixtures in game week 25 in terms of a blank. I feel like actually your squad is in a very, very good position here. You could swap maybe Bueno instead of Greenwood in terms of bench order, so you can ignore that. And ultimately you could move the armband onto, say, De Bruyne, Odegaard, or even Martinelli if you like. But ultimately you're going to be captaining a double game weeker, and I think Haaland makes the most sense. Your defence is in a really good position here for this game week as well. So again, it's a game week that I think you can get away with not taking a hit, just having that bit of patience with Mo Salah against Wolves in 22, and then finally dropping him for the doubler in De Bruyne. We then have a look at what we could do for you for 24, and as suggested with the previous team for Sportcat, I think rolling the transfer here is once again the optimum move. Of course, I've benched Trippier here. You could choose to play him, of course, against instead of any of these defenders, if you like. I just think that, again, Wolves against Bournemouth, Bueno just makes a lot of sense here to play. If you're going to play him at 1 week, this looks like an optimal time to do it. But of course, feel free to still play Trippier ahead of him. This is just based on fixtures alone and essentially maximum type of points, right? I feel like Liverpool could still score against Newcastle, even as good as they've been defensively. So that's why Trippier gets benched on this occasion. But ultimately, yeah, your team again is in a very good position where you can roll. I've got the captain armband on Haaland against Nottingham Forest there, vice captain against Odegaard. Vice captaincy on Odegaard against Aston Villa. Again, this can all be adjusted or moved, but ultimately rolling the transfer will give you so much flexibility going into game week 25. And this is where we lead into game week 25, where I recommend these two moves, which I never thought I would, to be honest, in terms of Aston Villa assets. But Ollie Watkins and Bailey look like very, very good options, I think, for this team in terms of possible output. As mentioned for Sportcat's team as well, Aston Villa are a team from game week 25 that have a really, really big fixture swing from an attacking and a defensive point of view. Now, of course, Bailey would be one that I would keep an eye on here. This is just a recommendation from now. We're still 3 or 4 weeks away from this game week, of course, but we know sometimes he's had a few injury niggles and maybe he doesn't get the consistency that we're looking for, in which case I'd maybe change the plans a little bit here. But what this allows you to do is it allows you to bench Trippier, Rashford and Shaw, who at this stage we're pretty confident are going to be blanking, and that gives you a full starting 11, bar possibly Estepinian, right? He's, again, the one individual in this squad that you wouldn't necessarily be able to field based on a blank. So you would have 10 out of an 11 starting lineup, which I think is absolutely great. It means you don't have to use a free hit chip or any type of chip to navigate this game week, and it puts you in a very strong position from 25 onwards. So hopefully that makes sense and hopefully that helps you. Again, it's still similarly structured in some ways. It's bringing us into a 3-4-3 formation in 25, and that is really just down to the fact that the teams or the players that a lot of us have as managers, because of Manchester United and Newcastle's possible blank, it makes the most sense in terms of a formation shift. So that's where I recommend you go. Finally, moving on to the third manager here then is Sebastian Henriksen. So somebody who's very engaged in this community. So well done to you for having the review on today's video, sir. But here we are. Here's your team and here's how you're lined up at the moment. I think I've also given you 4 stars out of 5, as I think you've put yourself into a very strong position, not only for game week 22's doubles. Of course, you've got Rodrigo in there, as do I. You have Rashford, you have Shaw, and of course you've just got, in my opinion, a very, very strong structure of a squad overall. You've got bench options. You've got Harry Kane there as well. I have benched him on this occasion just because the Man City fixture, I don't feel like you play him ahead of any of these individuals. You could potentially play him ahead of, say, Almiron, but we'll get to that in terms of transfer plans for you. You've got 0.7 million in the bank, which isn't the most money, but you've got a little bit of flexibility available to you. So let's have a look on what my recommendations are for you. Of course, captaincy armband still on Rashford, as for the reasons already stated. We're going to have a look at De Bruyne to Fernandes for you as well. I think that it just makes the most sense. Double game week player, bring him in, and essentially just it's someone that I think he hasn't shown so much form. He has, of course, from an FPL point of view, returned over the past few weeks, and since the World Cup break, he has actually returned pretty consistently. It's just he's not hitting, I would say, the heights of what he's done previously. But back-to-back home fixtures against Crystal Palace and Leeds, I just don't think it gets any better than that. And my bet would be that he outscores De Bruyne against Tottenham away. So I think that you bring the doubler in and it puts you into a great position for Game Week 22. My Game Week 23 recommendation would then actually be Rodrigo to Odegaard. So I know that one of your potential moves for Game Week 22 would have been Almiron to Odegaard and go 1 week early. But I actually think you can hold on to Almiron against West Ham, and then you've also got him against Bournemouth in this game week. Rodrigo plays Manchester United again, and we also know that with Leeds' let's say recruitment in January and also the position and Bamford returning as well, I don't think Rodrigo is going to be as far forward by this time as we would want. So across the 2 fixtures we get for him in double game week 22, I absolutely think he is a great pick, or he's a great hold if you purchased him. But I think that game week 23 onwards makes sense to get rid of him, because you're going to have Bamford contesting. You're going to have Rutter as well. That's the signing from January that will come into contention for that forward slot. I think, of course, the resurgence, or not resurgence, should I say, but the emergence of Nonto, of course, on that left-hand side. He seems to be cropping up more in the box and in those kind of finishing areas than Rodrigo. Rodrigo seems to be much more of a facilitator and just falling in that little bit deeper. And that's not what we want from an FPL point of view. We need returns. And I think that ultimately moving Rodrigo in for a double game weeker in Odegaard makes sense this week. That gives you 2.7 million in the bank still after all that's said and done. It does mean, however, that you've still got Fernandes as opposed to doing that swap back to De Bruyne. So that's something that you might want to look at. You might want to take the -4, but Fernandes against Leeds as a fixture is still very, very strong. So it's not something that you have to do. It's something that may be a nice to have for you. But your team, I think, in this week is looking very, very good. Yeah, I'm very impressed overall. Then we go into game week 24 for you. And again, it's the same situation. You've got a setup here that allows you to roll the transfer. You could maybe look at Fernandes back to De Bruyne at this point rather than doing it the last week for the double game week. They've of course got Nottingham Forest, and that's something that you could do. But I just think going into 25, as mentioned throughout this video, with 2 transfers in the bank, just allows us to react and essentially gives us the most flexibility for our potential blank game weekers. So then we go into game week 25 for you. And to be honest with you, it's very, very difficult at this stage for me and this early on without all of the fixtures in place to be able to recommend what you should do. But what I have put here is that it gives you a lot of flexibility. So ultimately in game week 25, here in front of you, we've got quite a few possible blank game weekers. You've got Fernandes, Toney, Mitoma and Almiron. So you have 4 individuals in your team that potentially would blank in your starting 11. Regardless of who you put in there, Shaw, Trippier, Rashford, they're also players that look like they're blanking. What I would recommend you do is probably look at Ivan Toney out to somebody. Again, maybe somebody like an Ollie Watkins that's already been spoken about on the video so far. You could, like I say, have gone from Fernandes to De Bruyne earlier in game week 24, giving only the 1 free transfer in 25, which means he would have the Bournemouth fixture as well. You then have Mitoma and Almiron to decide, do you want to keep them long term and you only field 9 players, or do you move them on to somebody based on the budget available for you and take that -4? So I think realistically, a lot of our teams are shaped up to be able to position into game week 25 with a minimum of 10 players. And I think that's very, very good. That's a strong position to be in, because with the amount of Manchester United, Newcastle assets, Brighton assets and so on that are in a lot of teams, being able to navigate through the double game weeks of 22 and 23 and still come out to 25 relatively unscathed, I think is really the best that we can ask for without having to force ourselves into a chip use. So hopefully that helps you. I know this isn't very specific for you, Seb, so apologies for that. But like I said, I've got a couple of recommendations for you on that list there with Watkins, with De Bruyne, Mitoma and Almiron. Like I say, it could become a slightly different budget midfielder. But overall, I think your squad is in, again, another really, really good position for these game week 22 and game week 23 doubles. So that's going to wrap up the video, guys. Hopefully you found it useful. I know this was very specific and unique to 3 individual managers' teams, and hopefully you guys yourselves found the content useful there. But of course, I know a lot of structures and teams are also very similar to the teams that were featured today. So hopefully you take away a couple of points here and some essential tips really that you can go away with for that run up into that possible blank game week of 25. And yeah, of course, thanks very much for watching, guys. If you did enjoy the content, then do feel free to subscribe. I will be here by your side all throughout the season, of course, into future FPL seasons as well. And of course, again, one more time, if you enjoyed the content, then smash that like button below, and I will see you very soon in another video and a live stream. Take care, guys, and I'll see you in the next one.